I was really excited about my 21st birthday, finally, full legal adulthood, and I wanted to celebrate in style. My uncle gave me permission to use his backyard, which had a pool and plenty of space for what I planned to be a memorable party. I invited my closest friends, set up some cool music, and bought drinks to last all night. It was supposed to be a simple gathering, but of course, when you open the door to a few people, they bring others, and soon, the party got out of hand. What started as a small group of friends quickly turned into a crowd. I looked around and saw a lot of people I didn't know. Someone had called more people, and suddenly, I was surrounded by strangers. It didn't take long for things to get chaotic. Loud music, people jumping into the pool, glasses breaking on the ground. The feeling of losing control of my own party started to bother me, but I tried not to think too much about it. After all, it was my birthday, and all I wanted was to have a good time. As the night went on, the party became even more out of control. The music was so loud, I could barely hear my own thoughts, and there were people, many of whom I'd never seen before, everywhere. I tried to enjoy myself, but it was hard to ignore the growing sense that things were spiraling. Then, my worst fears were confirmed. The neighbors called the cops. Squad cars pulled up with lights flashing, and most of the guests panicked, trying to get out as quickly as possible. The officers weren't exactly friendly, but after some warnings and a promise to shut the party down, the situation started to calm down. The crowd thinned out, leaving behind a colossal mess and a few close friends who decided to stay and help me clean up. Exhausted and frustrated with how things had turned out, I started checking the rooms in the house to make sure no one was left behind. When I got to the living room, I found Mike, one of my closest friends, completely drunk and passed out on the couch. He was out cold, unable to help with anything. I sighed, thinking the night was finally coming to an end, but then a strange unease washed over me. The house was too quiet, and a chill ran down my spine. As I walked through the house, the unease only grew. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I decided to check upstairs, just to make sure everything was in order. As soon as I climbed the stairs, I heard a faint sound, like light footsteps. My heart started racing. The hallway lights were off, and the house felt more sinister than before. That's when I noticed the door to my uncle's room, which I was sure I had locked, slightly ajar. My stomach knotted up. Carefully, I approached and slowly pushed the door open. The scene that greeted me froze me in place. A hooded figure was crouched down, rummaging through the drawers. The intruder turned, and our eyes met in a brief moment of pure terror. Without thinking twice, I turned around and bolted back down the stairs, fear driving me. I heard footsteps behind me but didn't dare to look back. I ran into the first room I found on the ground floor, locked the door, and grabbed my phone with trembling hands. I called the police, frantically whispering for them to come quickly. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. I could hear the muffled sound of footsteps, as if the intruder was walking through the house, searching for something. Or for me. Finally, the sound of sirens cut through the silence. The police had arrived, and I heard a commotion in the house before someone knocked on the door of the room where I was hiding. When the officers finally got me out, I saw they had managed to catch the intruder, who had been trying to escape through the back door. I was overcome with a mix of relief and shock. The night that was supposed to be a celebration had turned into a nightmare I would never forget. It was Tiago's birthday, and he wanted to do something different that night. Lucas, always the most daring of the group, came up with the idea. "Why don't we go off-roading at night?" he suggested, with that grin that always spelled trouble. We were all pumped. Pedro and Joao were on board from the start, and Marcelo, always up for trying something new, agreed right away. The plan was simple. We'd head to the state park, where we knew the trails would be challenging, and of course, where we weren't supposed to be after dark. The idea of doing something illegal, of breaking the rules just to feel the adrenaline, excited us even more. Tiago was thrilled, laughing, already planning how much fun it would be to smoke and drink in the middle of the woods with no one around to bother us. We got everything ready, drinks, some weed, and the gear for off-roading. Lucas's truck, a sturdy 4x4, was prepped for whatever the night might throw at us. Once we all settled into the truck and started down the trail, excitement took over. The darkness outside was absolute, and the idea of being isolated, far from any civilization, gave us a sense of freedom. The dirt road through the state park was rougher than we expected. Every turn and obstacle was a test for the truck, which roared and shook with every bump. But that just made us more excited. Tiago, riding shotgun, turned up the music, and the sound echoed inside the truck, drowning out the noises of the forest around us. After driving for a while, we reached a deeper part of the trail where Lucas decided to stop. "This is good," he said, turning off the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and almost eerie, but it was soon broken by laughter and the flicking of lighters. We turned off the lights, and the darkness swallowed everything around us. We lit up the weed, passed around the beer bottles, and the vibe was pure celebration. The forest was quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. The darkness felt thick, almost tangible, and every now and then, a distant rustle made us pause for a second, but nothing that stopped us from celebrating. After all, we were there to have fun and make Tiago's birthday unforgettable. We laughed, talked loudly, and drank, oblivious to what might be lurking in the darkness around us. In the middle of all that excitement, João, who was sitting in the back seat, suddenly stopped laughing and looked around, tense. "Did you guys hear that?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. We laughed, thinking he was just getting paranoid because of the weed. "What's up, João? Seeing ghosts?" I joked, but he didn't laugh. Then we heard it too, a distant sound, like a scream. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was a human sound, pained, like someone crying for help. The laughter died down. We all fell silent, listening carefully. The scream came again, louder this time, coming from somewhere in the darkness. The uneasy feeling grew, and I saw Marcelo starting to get nervous. Pedro, the only one who hadn't drunk much, suggested, "Maybe we should get out of here. This is getting weird." But no one wanted to be the chicken of the night, so we ignored it. We stayed, but the vibe was no longer fun. Every new sound from the forest sent a shiver down our spines. The screams kept coming, more frequent, closer. We couldn't tell where they were coming from anymore. They seemed to be surrounding us. The unease turned into fear, but no one wanted to admit it. Tiago tried to turn the music back on, but the sound no longer drowned out the silence the way it did before. The silence became heavy. Each of us felt the weight of the darkness around us. Suddenly, Lucas froze in the driver's seat. "Did you guys see that?" he whispered, his eyes locked on the darkness outside. We all turned in the same direction but didn't see anything at first. "Stop being paranoid, Lucas," Tiago said, but his voice trembled. Then we saw it, moving slowly between the trees, a shadow, or maybe several shadows, passing by us, only visible out of the corner of our eyes. My heart started racing. Lucas tried to start the truck, but the engine sputtered and died. He tried again, and the truck's lights flickered, briefly revealing what was out there. Figures. Several of them, all wearing hoods, their faces hidden in the darkness. They stood still, unmoving, forming a circle around the truck. No one spoke, no one moved. It was like time had frozen. Panic took over, but we were paralyzed, like prey, cornered. "Lucas, start the truck," Pedro shouted, finally breaking the silence. Lucas turned the key again, desperate. The engine finally roared to life, and the lights came on, but those figures didn't move. They just stood there, watching us. Lucas slammed on the gas, and the truck lurched forward, kicking up mud and leaves as we sped down the trail. In the rearview mirror, I saw the figures disappearing into the darkness, but the terror of them stayed etched in my mind. We sped down the trail. The sound of branches snapping under the tires and the roar of the engine were the only things we could hear. No one said a word. Everyone was in shock, trying to process what had just happened. The tension in the truck was palpable, each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to figure out what those figures were and why they were there. When we finally crossed the park's boundary and hit the paved road, we all let out a collective sigh, as if we'd been holding our breath since the moment we saw those figures. Lucas slowed down, and the silence returned, but now it was a different silence, one filled with fear and uncertainty. We got back to town, but no one had the courage to talk about what happened. We pulled into a gas station and just sat there for a while, in silence. Tiago was the first to get out of the truck, saying he needed some air. Soon, we all did the same. But no one mentioned those figures. No one wanted to speculate on what we had really seen. The drive home was quick and quiet. When we finally said our goodbyes, I realized Tiago's birthday had turned into something none of us would ever forget, but not for the reasons we had imagined. That night, something watched us, something that didn't belong to this world, and I knew, without a doubt, that we would never return to that forest. It was my sister Emily's birthday, and the party was happening at a tea house, decorated with balloons and flowers, filled with kids running around everywhere. She was beaming, surrounded by friends, opening presents and eating cake. I, Jake, was 12 years old and was there because my parents needed someone to help keep the kids under control. But honestly, I was bored. There wasn't much to do except watch the kids play in the backyard while I fiddled with my phone, trying to pass the time. The party was one of those things I knew I had to endure. It wasn't exactly the kind of thing a kid my age would find fun, but my parents were busy, and I was there to lend a hand. Watching the kids play and hearing the cheerful music in the background, I wondered how much longer I'd have to stick around. While I was messing with my phone, enjoying a few minutes of peace, a woman I'd never seen before approached me in the garden. She looked like she was in her 30s, with a friendly smile and a confident demeanor. "Hi, Jake, right?" she said, like she knew me. "I'm Aunt Anne, a friend of your parents. I came to the party and brought a special present for Emily. It's in my car, but it's kind of heavy. Could you help me carry it?" That caught me off guard. I had never heard of any Aunt Anne, and right away, something about the situation didn't feel right. She spoke so naturally, like she was really part of the family, but I couldn't remember her at all. Still, something about the way she looked at me and talked made me uncomfortable. I hesitated, wondering if I should really help her, but she kept smiling, waiting for me to say yes. I was suspicious. I had never seen this woman before, and the way she just appeared out of nowhere, claiming to be a family friend, made me uneasy. Aunt Anne kept smiling, but something about her expression seemed forced. To buy some time, I started asking questions. I asked if she had been to any of Emily's other parties, but her answers were vague, like she was trying to recall details she didn't know. "Oh, I'm a friend of your mom's from work," she said, but didn't elaborate. As she kept insisting that we needed to go quickly, my discomfort grew. When I looked around, I realized we were alone in the garden, away from the adults and the other kids. My stomach knotted up, but I didn't want to seem rude or impolite. Still, something inside me screamed not to go. Yet, I started walking toward the tea house gate with her beside me, but my suspicions only grew with each step. As we got closer to the gate, I kept questioning Aunt Anne, trying to buy more time. I asked about the present she wanted me to help carry, but she dodged the question, saying it was something big and special, without giving any details. When we reached the gate, I finally saw her car parked on the street. A man was sitting in the driver's seat, the engine running, staring directly at us with a serious expression. Something clicked, was definitely wrong. That's when a cold chill ran down my spine. My instinct was screaming at me to get out of there as fast as I could. I suddenly stopped, pretending I had forgotten something inside the party. "Oh, I need to grab something inside first. Wait here, I'll be right back," I said, trying to sound calm, but my heart was racing. Without waiting for her response, I turned around and ran back into the tea house as fast as my legs would carry me. I didn't look back. All I wanted was to get back to my parents and the safety of the party. I ran back inside the tea house, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally got inside the main room, I searched for my parents, still trying to process what had just happened. I found my mom near the cake table, and without wasting any time, told her everything about Aunt Anne and the man waiting in the car with the engine running. Her expression changed instantly, from concern to pure terror. She called my dad, and together they quickly went outside to check the situation. I stayed inside, watching through the window as they looked around the garden and the street. But as I feared, the woman and the car were already gone. That mix of relief and fear washed over me. I knew I had done the right thing by not trusting her. The party went on, but the mood had shifted. My parents were clearly worried, and everyone seemed more alert and cautious. Later, my parents told me that I had done the right thing, that it's always important to trust your instincts, especially when something doesn't feel right. That day, I learned an important and dangerous lesson. Despite the scare, we were all grateful that nothing worse had happened. I couldn't think of a better place to celebrate my 22nd birthday than that cabin. Far from the city, far from the noise, just me and my friends enjoying a weekend in the woods. We hit the road early in the morning, and after a few hours of driving through winding roads, we finally arrived at the cabin. It was simple, but perfect. Made of wood, with a porch that overlooked a dense sea of trees surrounding it. The weather was perfect too. The sun was setting as we lit the campfire outside. We brought beers, meat for the barbecue, and even a little portable radio to play some music. The sound of laughter, jokes, and beer cans popping filled the air, and I couldn't help but smile. This was exactly what I wanted. The cabin had a rustic charm, with old furniture and a fireplace that, thankfully, we wouldn't need in the summer. We decided to stay outside longer, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the view of the star-filled sky. Around 9, the atmosphere around us started to change. The laughter faded as the sky grew darker and the sounds of the forest took over. Crickets chirping, leaves rustling, and something else. Something I couldn't quite identify. I thought it was just my imagination, the effect of the alcohol, or the absolute silence of the place. But as the night wore on, I began to realize I wasn't the only one noticing the strange sounds coming from the darkness. The first sound came from somewhere to our right, something like a dry crack, as if someone was stepping on twigs. I looked at the others, but no one seemed to notice. However, minutes later, when the same sound happened again, this time closer, everyone exchanged glances. "Must be some animal," Logan said, trying to sound casual, but the tension on his face told a different story. I wanted to believe that, too, but there was something unsettling about the way the sound seemed to move around us, as if it were circling. Then the stones started to appear. Small ones, about the size of a walnut, flying out of the darkness and landing around us, some even hitting the side of the cabin. At first, one, then another. At first, we tried to laugh it off, like it was some stupid prank. Maybe one of us was trying to scare the others, but I knew my friends well, and the fear I saw in their eyes wasn't fake. We grew more tense, trying to find explanations. We tried turning on our flashlights, but their beams seemed to get lost in the thick darkness of the forest. Whatever was out there knew exactly how to keep us in the dark, how to scare us. The radio, which had been playing music up until then, started emitting static, like something was interfering with the signal. I tried fiddling with the antenna, but it was no use. "I'm gonna check it out," said Mark, always the bravest of the group. He grabbed one of the flashlights and walked a few yards away from the fire, heading toward the bushes. We all stayed silent, waiting. Time seemed to drag on. Then his scream echoed through the night, a sound of pure terror. Mark came running back, pale, unable to say anything coherent, but he didn't need to. The panic on his face said it all. Something was out there, watching us, surrounding us. We decided to go into the cabin and lock the doors. But what was supposed to be a safe haven now felt like a trap. No cell signal, no communication with the outside world. We were completely isolated. Fear consumed us, and a debate broke out. Should we stay there and wait for daylight, or risk fleeing into the dark forest? Each of us had a different opinion, but deep down, we all knew it didn't matter. Neither option felt truly safe. The tension inside the cabin was suffocating. The flashlights, though on, seemed unable to penetrate the darkness creeping in through the windows. Everyone was talking at once, their voices low, full of fear and uncertainty. The sound of stones hitting the cabin had stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. I could hear my own breathing, quick and shallow. "We have to get out of here," Emily said, her voice trembling. She was on the verge of tears, clutching Logan's arm like her life depended on it. I wanted to agree with her. Every instinct of mine screamed to run, but to where? The forest was an unknown maze, and without enough light, we could easily get lost, or worse, run into whatever was out there. "If we stay here, we're trapped," Logan said, his voice filled with a calmness I knew was forced. "But if we leave now, we might walk right into their trap." That's when we heard it again. It wasn't footsteps, but a whispering sound like leaves being dragged, coming from the back door. Someone, or something, was trying to get in. Everyone froze. The doorknob turned slowly, making a sinister click that echoed through the room. I held my breath, expecting the worst. And then the door started to open, just a crack, but enough to see a pale, dirty hand reaching inside. Before I could react, Mark lunged forward with a shout, slamming the door shut and locking it again. That was the breaking point. That simple act made the tension explode. "Let's get out of here, now," I yelled. And everyone nodded, not questioning. We bolted out the front door, running like our lives depended on it. And I knew they did. The darkness was total, and the noises around us grew louder. I heard more stones hitting the nearby trees, more whispers, but I didn't dare look back. We ran for what felt like an eternity, tripping over roots and branches, with the darkness trying to swallow us whole. My legs burned with exhaustion, and my breath hurt in my chest. But I kept going. There was no other choice. Finally, we saw the lights of the road. It was faint, but enough to guide us. We reached the car, breathless, and Mark practically threw the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and we sped away, leaving the cabin behind, without looking back. Only when we were miles away, in the relative safety of the city, did we begin to slow down. No one said a word. We were all exhausted, physically and mentally. The laughter and birthday celebration felt like they belonged to another life, to another person. Whatever had chased us stayed behind in those dark trees, but I knew the memories of that night would never leave me. After we got back to the city, we parted ways, each of us trying to process what had happened in our own way. I wanted to believe I was safe now, but as the days went by, I couldn't help but look over my shoulder, expecting to see a shadow, hear a whisper, or the crack of a branch under unseen feet. My 18th birthday couldn't have been better planned. My friends decided to celebrate by going to a popular amusement park in the area, filled with rides that promised adrenaline and unforgettable moments. The sky was already getting dark when we arrived, and the park's lights were shining brightly, creating a magical atmosphere. As soon as we walked through the gates, we were greeted by the sounds of laughter, loud music, and excited screams. The first ride we chose was the roller coaster. Nothing like a shot of adrenaline to kick off the night. While waiting in line, we laughed and joked around, and I couldn't have been happier. It was my day, and everything seemed perfect. But just as we were about to board, I saw something that made me stop. A hooded figure, standing at a distance, staring directly at us. At first, I thought it was just another visitor, maybe waiting for someone. But there was something strange about the way the person stood so still, with the hood covering their face, making it impossible to see any details. I tried to brush it off and continued on, but the image of that figure stuck in my mind. We went on to other rides, laughing and taking pictures, but every time I looked around, there was the figure, always at a distance, always present. I thought about mentioning it to my friends, but decided it was better not to ruin the mood. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. My 18th birthday couldn't have been better planned. My friends decided to celebrate by going to a popular amusement park in the area, filled with rides that promised adrenaline and unforgettable moments. The sky was already getting dark when we arrived, and the park's lights were shining brightly, creating a magical atmosphere. As soon as we walked through the gates, we were greeted by the sounds of laughter, loud music, and excited screams. The first ride we chose was the roller coaster. Nothing like a shot of adrenaline to kick off the night. While waiting in line, we laughed and joked around, and I couldn't have been happier. It was my day, and everything seemed perfect. But just as we were about to board, I saw something that made me stop. A hooded figure, standing at a distance, staring directly at us. At first, I thought it was just another visitor, maybe waiting for someone. But there was something strange about the way the person stood so still, with the hood covering their face, making it impossible to see any details. I tried to brush it off and continued on, but the image of that figure stuck in my mind. We went on to other rides, laughing and taking pictures, but every time I looked around, there was the figure, always at a distance, always present. I thought about mentioning it to my friends, but decided it was better not to ruin the mood. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. The revelation about the past crime completely changed the atmosphere around us. We tried to keep acting normal, but the fun was gone. Every sound, every shadow made our hearts race. The hooded figure wouldn't leave us alone. From that moment on, everything we did was driven by fear. We walked in silence. And that's when we realized we were being led to a part of the park we hadn't explored before. A more secluded area where the lights weren't as bright and people didn't venture much. "We need to get out of here," Sophia said, her voice trembling. I was about to agree when, out of nowhere, the hooded figure appeared again, much closer this time. They were standing at a crossroads in the path, as if waiting for us. My heart nearly stopped. That closeness felt different, threatening in a way I couldn't explain. "This way," Noah shouted, pulling the group in the opposite direction. We ran down a narrow trail, but soon realized we had entered a nearly deserted part of the park, where the lights were few and dim. The sounds of the main attractions were distant now, and all we could hear were our hurried footsteps and heavy breathing. Suddenly, we hit a dead end. A tall, rusty fence blocked our path. We turned to go back, but before we could take a step, the hooded figure appeared again, blocking our only way out. They were so close, I could feel the air grow heavier around us. The hood completely obscured their face, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way they stood so still, as if daring us to make the next move. "Who are you? What do you want?" Noah shouted. But the figure didn't respond. They just stood there, like a living shadow, full of intentions we couldn't understand. Then the park lights started to flicker, flashing erratically, plunging us into brief moments of total darkness. And in the instant when the lights finally stabilized, the figure had disappeared again, as if they had never been there. We didn't need anything else to decide. We ran back the way we came, our feet moving almost by instinct. When we finally reached the main area of the park, we blended into the crowd, trying to find safety among the people. A short time later, we left the park without looking back. In the car, the silence between us was overwhelming, but no one knew what to say. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts, processing what had just happened. When we got home, we collapsed on the couch, still out of breath, trying to make sense of that night. But no matter how much we tried, the feeling that we weren't alone, that something or someone was still watching us, never completely went away. And as I lay down to sleep that night, the images of the hooded figure and the eerie park kept haunting me.